Welcome to the Global Lane. I'm Gary Lane. On today's Where in the World, Nina Shea, an international human rights lawyer and international Christian religious freedom advocate, will join us to talk about the State Department's on-again, off-again genocide determination for Christians and Yazidis in the Middle East. And are any of your tax dollars actually getting through to help them? Next, from the home front, CBN's Mengfei Li, who just returned from China, will tell us what they plan on doing to halt North Korea's threats against the homeland. And moving on to Set It Straight, Sterling Beard from Campus Reform joins us. He'll talk about the latest drama on yet another university campus. A bias incident prevention and response coordinator will be hired there to clamp down on students of concern. The tell-all is coming up. And is the term Islamic Terrorism offensive? Lauren Creekmore shows us what people are really saying out on the street. And lastly, on Driving It Home, I'll tell you why Trump praying in the White House is not as crazy as the left says it is. And it all starts right now, right here on the Global Lane. The U.S. State Department blatantly ignored genocide against Christians in ISIS territories during the time of the Obama administration. Why would this be ignored? The State Department never even acknowledged genocide in the human rights reports this past spring. Will this change under Trump's new leadership? Well, here to explain this shocking lack of recognition is Nina Shea. She's the director for the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Nina, thanks for joining us. So what do you make of this whole State Department genocide back off? Are they back on now?
Thanks so much, Gary. Yes, they were reluctant to say anything about genocide against the Christians, against the other minorities in ISIS territory. And the anniversary of the designation of genocide by the State Department a year ago went by in silence from the State Department. Of course, President Trump, Vice President Pence have talked about it, acknowledged it, but not the State Department. And that's very important for policy.
Why did it seem like they were backing off on this? Were these Obama administration holdovers? Who was responsible in the legal department?
Well, there was the acting legal advisor who was appointed about 3 weeks before the election by under President Obama's administration, and he was suddenly saying, wait a minute, we can't have a designation of genocide because it doesn't meet court standards in the United States. And then there was others within the State Department who were saying, oh, this is fake news, sowing confusion about what the real state of play was and what they really did determine. I know that the designation anniversary came and went with them being silent. I know that the State Department human rights reports were released this spring without any mention of genocide. This is the most egregious human rights abuse known to man. And there was no mention of that determination in the report. The reports were done under the Obama administration, and we pushed back on that, and it was reinserted as Secretary Kerry's personal opinion that there was genocide. So I think this is something more stronger than what actually Secretary Kerry said. This is a firm belief by the Secretary of State, acting as Secretary of State, announced at an official State Department press conference. I think that it's a win for us.
That's a big win. And Nina, for most of our viewers, explain why is it so important that we have this designation, this determination of genocide against Christians, Yazidis, and others in the Middle East?
Well, it's important on a number of levels. First of all, moral level, justice level. There may be eventually a court case that takes this up and gives justice to these people who've had their lives shattered, their loved ones enslaved, murdered, and tortured. So this is extremely important to them for that reason alone. But also in an era where there's limited aid, limited reconstruction aid with massive destruction over there. The Christians of Erbil have testified in Congress before Congressman Chris Smith, subcommittee on Helsinki, and saying that they have not received any U.S. aid that really comprehensively feeds these people, over 100,000 of them, of Christians who have lost everything to ISIS, who are homeless, for 3 years. They have not received U.S. aid. So we're sending...
Nina, that would be shocking to most Americans to know that, because they think we're helping them. I know that there was $1 billion allocated by the U.S. Congress to help refugees, yet only about $10 million is going to persecuted Christians.
And they'll be lucky to get that, Gary, because in the past, this has been diverted to other people, other pockets. I'm not saying that this has been corrupt, but it in this particular situation. But what it has done is housed and provided for the UN to refugee camps.
What can we do?
Well, we can put pressure on our own members of Congress, and there is legislation, especially in the Senate right now, House H.R. 390, and that is to make sure that these genocide-targeted Christians get their fair share of aid.
I can't have you leave without commenting on the nominee, someone that you and I both have known for many years, Sam Brownback, the governor of Kansas, will be, if he gets confirmed, our next religious freedom ambassador at large at the U.S. State Department. What do you think?
I'm absolutely delighted that they picked Sam. I have worked with him when he was in the Senate on these issues of religious persecution, in that time in South Sudan, which was another genocide, and in Darfur. And he has been a leader on human trafficking and China. So he really knows these issues, and he was just a wonderful leader in the Senate and is smart and dedicated. So I think this whole problem would have been avoided if he had been in place, actually.
Well, I can't think of a better candidate for the position other than maybe you, but I think we need you at Hudson Institute.
Well, we're all still at it, Gary, you and me and Sam Brownback and Frank Wolf, and Frank is traveling on these issues as we speak.
Yes, he is. Well, thank you, Nina, for your insights. We appreciate it. God bless you. Mengfei Li now joins us to discuss North Korea's latest ICBM missile test and how China can halt their efforts. So, Mengfei, we're seeing a lot of tension now between the U.S. and North Korea, and leader Kim Jong-un says that the test was a success, his most recent one, that the U.S. is now in range of his missiles. He says all of the U.S., that may be doubtful, but we're hearing nothing come out of China about all this. You were just in China. What are you hearing there?
Well, Gary, thank you for having me. Let me say this time, recently I was in China. The people in China are actually not very anxious or worried about all the activities going on in North Korea.
Not at all? Or?
Not really. You know, there's a saying in English, it's called barking dogs do not bite. So actually, when you talk to people, they believe Kim Jong-un is just one of the barking dogs. So it's just basically making a big deal or making the fuss, but actually there's nothing real, or he's not gonna do anything damaging to the relationships to the international community.
So government-wise then, the Chinese government may not see a sense of urgency in all this. And so what can they do? What will they do to stop this?
Well, right now, all they're trying to do is they want to portray the peaceful, the unity. They have bigger things to work on. They have a Great War project. So right now for North Korea, what they do right now is they're saying, let's not worry about it. Let's ignore it, because right now we have better things to do, especially in terms of maintaining the positive relationship with the United States and also the neighbors like Japan and South Korea. And those are very important for the future development of China.
And I'm sure they're preoccupied a little bit with the economy, which has been down a little bit of late.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do the Chinese people really feel about North Korea overall?
Well, again, you know the history. Back in the 1950 to 53 and the Korean War, North Korea and China were actually allies. So if you talk to the average citizen, especially the younger generations, they believe it's not a big deal. Really, it's because we were allies. So let's say they have struggles between North Korea and United States. That's their problem. It's not our problem.
That's a problem for the U.S. and North Korea to work out.
There you go.
Do they see that China has a role in this?
Well, I think in the long run is as long as the relationship does not bring any more damages or any holes to the China, I think that's the thing.
Teddy Roosevelt had this saying, speak softly but carry a big stick. Right. Trump is someone who speaks loudly and carries a big stick. Should he kind of tone it down a little bit? What do you think the Trump administration's approach should be to China at this point to get their help?
Well, Gary, again, I'm very glad you mentioned about this Trump administration. U.S. President Donald Trump likes tweeting. Okay, I think for the Chinese government or even for the Chinese President Xi Jinping, number one, it's he need to stop tweeting, or he need to minimize the tweet first.
About China.
About China. You know, and also he was saying China or other nations are not doing the job to manipulating or to minimizing the threat from North Korea. But actually the Chinese government is saying we are doing something, but maybe just not the way you want it. So for the U.S. government, in order to move along with the project with North Korea, you need to work closely with the Chinese government, keep us in the loop, and let us help you. So again, I think not too long ago the report came out and the Chinese government was saying that United States definitely should not act alone on this matter. In other words, we want to help, but we might not be the first country want to take the first step.
Well, I'm sure the president is looking at Japan and South Korea very closely.
Oh, absolutely.
And seeking their advice as well. Right. Now, we appreciate your reporting. You have regular stories now in Mandarin on Facebook. It's called Chinese Christian World News, CCWN. Right on Facebook. We'll be looking for more reports.
Absolutely, and there'll be so many more interesting stories. Again, Gary, those are stories that we only have from Christian World News that no one else we can find. So I would love for more fans continue to follow us on Facebook, check out the unique and only stories that we find here.
Okay, Mengfei Li, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Is the word Islamic terrorism offensive? Well, some people seem to think so. Lauren Creekmore took to the street to see what people were saying about it. Take a look.
Do you think that the term Islamic terrorism is offensive?
Yes, I do. I mean, anybody can be a terrorist, so putting Islamic in front of it can be offensive.
No, I don't.
I do not, no. You know, Islamic, that's not bad, but when people are blowing up cities and houses and those kind of things, yeah, those are terrorists. So I don't tie the two together. Just because it's Islamic, it doesn't mean that it's terrorist, but somebody that's doing those kind of things, it is terrorism.
It depends how you're using it. If you're using it in a legit way, like if there are terrorists around, then no. But if you're just talking about some random guy who looks Muslim, then maybe, yeah.
Okay.
Islamic terrorism is really offensive to my view because there is no Islamic terrorism. Because the word Islam means peace. That's an Arabic word, means peace. The root of the word Islam is peace. So that's a modern word that people want to add to Islam, and that connotation is really derogatory for me. So what we see around the world going on right now is just action of thugs, and it doesn't justify the original mission of Islam, which is to gather.
No, I don't. I don't feel it's offensive.
No, it's not.
Because it just is what it is, and that it is not offensive. If it's offensive, then so be it.
No, I don't. I don't feel it's offensive at all. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, there's Islamic groups out there that they are doing terrorism, and they are linked to Islam.
So, Lauren, this is incredible. Do you think the term Islamic terrorism is offensive?
Gary, absolutely not. Some of the people that I addressed out on the street need to understand what the term really means. The idea of using the term Islamic terrorism is not an effort to isolate a certain group of people for religious beliefs or hate. It's a term that is used because those who practice under the name of Islam are highly more likely to commit a terrorist attack than a white evangelical Christian. You know, I never hear in the name of Jesus after a bomb explodes, and I'm pretty sure that the word Allah, and we all know what that means, and it stems from the Islamic religion.
Well, why do you think some people believe this term is offensive?
I think it's a lack of knowledge on what this religion is really about. You know, the Quran directly calls Muslims to kill the infidels and spread Islam. So the man who called Islam and the religion as the religion of peace in the video is sadly just mistaken. We look back, we saw H.R. McMaster even earlier this year. He set a completely different tone than Trump on this issue, where he said jihadist terrorists aren't true to their professed religion. and that it doesn't help with the U.S. working with the allies to defeat terrorist groups. And, my reaction to that was, well, ignoring the so-called JV League, otherwise known as ISIS, like the past administration did, doesn't really help all that much either. This is reported to be a conflict in the White House between Trump and McMaster, so the battles keep coming for the president, and unfortunately, they keep coming on this issue, which is crazy to me. McMaster is said to have the goal of purging the White House of Trump loyalists, so we'll see what happens there with Trump's agenda and so forth when it comes to our military in these political correct terms and how all these plans actually play out. But the bottom line is that our nation has gotten so sensitive and we have fallen into the trap of complete intimidation and political correctness, which our enemies have clearly capitalized on. No one should apologize for stating the facts. We just can't say anything anymore.
I mean, right now it seems we have a religion that's clearly committing hate crimes and killing people around the world. Some Americans still can't recognize that, Lauren, that many Muslims, even in the United States, are not speaking about these horrific facts. So what do you think? I mean, are we coming to the point where no one will admit anything is happening?
100%. It's so true. I mean, you can see from the interviews that I conducted there, people are really, really afraid of offending people who practice the Muslim religion. But I think it's a lot of the media's fault. I think they put this emphasis on sensitivity and all of these different things, and it kind of came out of nowhere and it really intensified, and it's obviously a political game. But I have to mention that what a reporter, she put out an article a couple months ago, and you can see the graphic here, her headline. Newsweek put it out, and she basically states that terrorists in the U.S. are mostly right-wing and not Muslim. She says the president has his facts muddled when it comes to terrorist attacks and that the right-wing extremists were more successful and deadly in their attacks. I'm trying to figure out what attacks, she's reported or she's talking about. She clearly did not agree with Trump's travel ban, where he barred Muslims from those 6 countries. Take a look at this map that I found from mapsesri.com. These are all the terrorist attacks from 2017. And those are the attacks the president does not want to come here. And a majority, I guess, that we're seeing on this map were not made by right-wingers. It's a real shocker. But going back to her headline, it says that most terrorists in the U.S. are right-wing and not Muslim. It's laughable. She also went on to say that in the past 9 years, right-wing extremists plotted out or carried out nearly twice as many terrorist attacks as Islamist extremists, and that they were more successful and deadly. But to her credit, she did note that Islamists killed more people overall, so good for her. But I think people like this reporter miss the entire point. We can't let certain people in, period. When it happens to them, I guess they'll finally understand this concept. But terrorist attacks that occur successfully overseas could easily happen here if we have weak policy. And I know people like this reporter have to understand that. So for me, it was a huge stretch.
Well, it's incredible. I mean, it's like, what world is she living in? If she really thinks these are more right-wing conservatives that are making these attacks in the U.S. Now, I guess it just depends on what the definition of terrorist is and what you consider a terrorist. To me, it's someone who spreads terror, and that is their goal. There's a difference, I think, between just gangs fighting each other.
100%. 100%.
Okay, Lauren Creekmore, thanks so much for setting us straight.
Thanks, Gary.
The University of Michigan is looking to hire a new, quote, bias incident prevention and response coordinator to clamp down on, quote, students of concern and enact cultural appropriation preventative initiatives. At $46,000 to $50,000 a year, the coordinator will oversee, quote, bias incidents reported on campus, as well as various, quote, social justice initiatives. A safe listening space to offer compassion, support, and guidance to students will also be available. Now, the job description states on the website that the program will, quote, promote an inclusive campus climate and facilitate the successful navigation of campus life. It adds that it will, quote, provide a safe listening space in which to offer compassion, support, and guidance to students. Well, here to discuss this new safe space is Editor-in-Chief Sterling Beard from Campus Reform. Sterling, that's my alma mater, and I know they've been known for excellence in academics and athletics, but what about this?
Well, I wish I could say that Michigan was a little unusual in this regard, or that, a bias incident response team was an unusual thing to have on a college campus, but that's not the case. We see this sort of thing fairly often at the Leadership Institute's campusreform.org. University of Oregon has had a bias incident response team for some time, and BIRT's, BIRT's bias incident response teams, they're fairly common, but they never really seem to catch any actual evil doing. To give you an example, we saw a recent alleged bias incident at the University of Maryland in June, in which a piece of plastic wrap that was knotted up slightly and dropped on the grass underneath a tree outside of a frat was reported as a bias incident, apparently because it vaguely resembled a noose. It couldn't have just been litter. It had to be a racial incident. That's what the sort of campus environment these bias incident response teams, the attitude that promulgates them creates.
Well, how does the university define bias?
Well, it's basically any sort of situation where someone feels attacked because of, there are actually 10 different categories that University of Michigan lists that could be, if somebody felt that they had been attacked through one of these categories, say sexual orientation or gender identity, age, religion, et cetera, so forth and so on, they could report one of these report that incident as a bias incident on the university's website or through a hotline.
Well, tell me, how did you come across this story?
Well, we're always on the lookout for incidents of liberal bias and abuse at America's higher education campuses. So when we saw this, we knew immediately that it was a little wild that they were going to be hiring not only for a position to coordinate these kinds of incidents, but also that the fact that it was going to be paid in excess of $50,000, up to in excess of $50,000, and required a master's degree in order to apply. I mean, I've heard of dangerously overqualified, but that seems to be pushing it.
So tell me, what does clamping down entail? What is the enforcement of this on the students?
Well, the university says that it focuses primarily on restorative justice rather than punitive measures. So you're talking about, sitting down, talking about it. You're not looking necessarily so much at punitive measures. Of course, I would say that being forced to sit down and hold hands and go through all those kind of workshop things that so many mediations seem to devolve into on the college campuses, I'd argue that's still in and of itself a form of punitive damages. But that's the sort of thing the administration wants to do, is clamp down on, you can't say certain things because it might offend the wrong people. And that kind of attitude the administration conveys to the students are going to carry that attitude with them out of college. That's going to be a problem for America. Look, 40% of millennials have said that they wouldn't have too much of a problem with restricting speech that was offensive to minorities. And who gets to define who's offensive to who, what's offensive to who? That's the issue we're looking at long term.
Okay, Sterling, so M go blue and hail to the victors, but not necessarily in this case. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
For the first time in this country in 100 years, almost all members of the president's cabinet are holding a regular weekly Bible study. CBN News White House correspondent Jennifer Wishon talked to the man leading the study, Capitol Hill Ministries pastor Ralph Drollinger.
Ralph Drollinger is a former NBA playing giant of a man with an even bigger calling. He founded Capitol Ministries with the idea that if you change the hearts of lawmakers, then their Christian worldview will guide them to make good policies. He's started Bible studies in 40 state capitals, teaches weekly studies in the U.S. House and Senate, and now leads about a dozen members of President Trump's cabinet in weekly studies of the Bible. Health Secretary Tom Price, Energy Secretary Rick Perry, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, and CIA Director Mike Pompeo are just a few of the regulars.
It's the best Bible study I've ever taught in my life. They are so teachable, they're so noble, they're so learned.
America's top cop, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, also attends.
Like Jeff Sessions, he'll go out the same day I teach him something and I'll see him do it on camera. And I just think, man, these guys are faithful, available, and teachable, and they're at Bible study every week they're in town.
President Trump is invited to attend the Bible studies too. Each week he receives a copy of Drollinger's teachings, and when he can, Vice President Mike Pence will join the study. In Pence, Drollinger sees similarities to Joseph, Mordecai, and Daniel from the Bible, all men who rose to the number 2 position in governments at different times in history.
Mike Pence has respect for the office. He dresses right, like it says Joseph, cleaned himself up before he went to stand before the Pharaoh. Mike Pence has uncompromising biblical tenacity, and yet a loving tone about him that's not just a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And I praise God for Mike Pence, who I think with Donald Trump chose great people to lead our nation.
Now, some people may be outraged. They worry evangelicals are taking over. What about separation of church and state, they ask? Well, you know, last time I checked, I didn't see that wording in the U.S. Constitution, and no one from the government is forcing you to attend a particular church service, are they? Well, protecting you from that is in the Constitution. It's called the Establishment Clause. And remember this image? Some Americans were outraged when they saw this photo of President Trump praying with a group of evangelical pastors in the Oval Office. One reporter wanted to know if they prayed because the White House was in crisis. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders responded saying prayer should be practiced daily, in the best of times and the worst of times. And a majority of us agree with her. A Pew Research poll found that 55% of Americans say they pray every day. Yet some Americans posted tweets like, "How'd the exorcism go?" One person described the Oval Office prayer as voodoo mojo. And the head of the North Carolina NAACP, a pastor, said the prayer bordered on heresy, a violation of the sacred principles of religion because the president is praying on the most vulnerable of society. Apparently, he doesn't like President Trump's position on health care. Instead, I guess Reverend William Barber believes the lie that if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Obamacare will save the average American $2,500 annually. He believes that. But that's for later and another commentary. But back to the White House prayer. I wonder how many people take offense with this scene, a praying General George Washington at Valley Forge, depicted by artist Arnold Freiberg. Oh my, what kind of voodoo mojo was the father of our country practicing there in the wilderness? You know, Washington prayed often, and he asked God to bless the nation and those who had been appointed to rule over us. And which of these would you think most of us would rather see take place in the Oval Office? People praying with Trump, or this, a president messing around with an intern? I think most of us would prefer to see prayer. God expects us to pray for our president. In 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 4, we're told to offer up supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings for all people, for kings, and all who are in high positions. God can change and influence hearts. Don't we all want godly government and righteous rulers? With a growing missile threat from North Korea, wars still raging in Syria, Russia, and China flexing their military muscles on the global lane, many challenges right here on the home front, maybe praying for wisdom for our president and nation isn't a bad thing. When we recite our national pledge, we say, "One nation under God." Printed on our currency is, "In God we trust." We have a faithful tradition as a nation that seeks God. So let's keep praying for our president and for our nation's leaders. Yes, some people will be offended. I don't know about you, but I think I'd rather offend a few of my neighbors than, well, let's see, the creator of the universe? Well, that's it from the Global Lane this week. We'll see you next time. Be blessed.